Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Abby. I love all things public transportation, trains, planes, boats, buses, all the things. And so today I am going to be sharing a really interesting piece of history with you guys out of Cincinnati, Ohio.
Cincinnati sits right on the banks of the Ohio River and it is surrounded by hills. As the population grew through the 1800s, people began moving up into those hills, and as the city began to implement public transportation methods, these hills proved to be a problem. In 1859, Cincinnati began introducing horse cars, which were basically just horse-drawn streetcars. Very few cities at this point had any kind of rail system, so Cincinnati was definitely ahead of its time. However, because of how hilly Cincinnati is, the animals would get tired and the hills became impossible to climb in bad weather. Initially, Cincinnati introduced cable cars. The problem with cable cars was they require a cable to be pulled underneath the car, which means that the cable has to be replaced quite often. So this led Cincinnati to invest in electric methods, and in August of 1887, the first streetcars were introduced. The old cable car routes at this point were then converted or abandoned. At its peak, Cincinnati had over 222 miles of track in Cincinnati and northern Kentucky, and for decades, the streetcar served over 100 million passengers a year. Something I found super interesting is that Cincinnati streetcar was one of only 3 streetcar systems in the world to use the double overhead trolley wire. The other 2 are Havana, Cuba, and a very small system in Merrill, Wisconsin. Another interesting thing is that Cincinnati was actually home to one of the country's largest streetcar manufacturing companies, which was called the Cincinnati Car Company, and it operated in the early 1900s. One of the most interesting parts of the Cincinnati streetcar system were the inclines. Cincinnati had 5 inclines: Mount Adams, Mount Auburn, Fairview, Bellevue, and Price Hill. All of the inclines except for the Fairview incline carried horse cars first, and eventually the much heavier streetcars. Streetcars would drive up onto a platform, and then the platform would just be pulled up the incline by a cable. Once reaching the top, the streetcar would just drive right off onto the tracks. The first incline to open was the Mount Auburn incline, and it opened in 1872. Cincinnati likely got the idea for an incline from nearby Pittsburgh. They opened their incline in 1870, and it is still open today. I really want to go there. I need to make a trip over to Pittsburgh. The Mount Auburn incline followed what today is the Main Street steps, which go from Main Street at the bottom all the way up to Jackson Hill Park at the top. Where Jackson Hill Park is used to sit the Lookout House, which was allegedly the place to be for music, dancing, fireworks, and beer. This incline did not last long, especially when you compare it to the other inclines. This one closed in 1898. The second incline to open was the Price Hill incline, which opened in 1875. It connected today's Olden View Park with the intersection of 8th and State Streets below. This incline had 2 separate tracks, one that was just for passengers and another one just for freight. This was the only family-owned incline, being owned by William Price, who was the grandson of the founder of Price Hill. The Price Hill incline was also the steepest incline of all of them. There was a restaurant at the top called Price Hill House, which sat where Queen's Tower is today. Because Price Hill House didn't serve alcohol, this incline got the nickname of Buttermilk Incline. This incline actually lasted until 1942, and today there is a restaurant that sits right at the top of the hill and makes a nod to the history with its name of Incline Public House. The next incline to open was also the longest running incline, and that was the Mount Adams incline. It opened in 1876. This incline had a great view of the city below, making it a very popular tourist attraction, and in its early days, a restaurant called Highland House sat right at the top. The craziest thing to me is when I see a house in a historical photo or painting of these inclines, and then I realize it's still there, like this one on Mount Adams. This incline was the last to close in 1948, and at the time that it closed, people complained about it being unsightly and useless, but it was the most popular tourist attraction in Cincinnati at that time. And I guarantee you people would still come from all over the world to see it. If you go up on Mount Adams today, there are supports from these inclines still visible on the side of the hill. The next incline to open was the Bellevue Incline, which also opened in 1876. It connected what today is Bellevue Park with what used to be the Jackson Brewery at the bottom. At the top of this incline was the Bellevue House, which was considered to be the most beautiful of all the incline houses. The Bellevue House sadly burned down in 1901, and then the incline closed in 1926. Today, if you drive down Clifton Avenue, you can still see some of the supports that held up the Bellevue Incline. The final incline to open was the Fairview Incline, which opened in 1894. It connected Fairview Avenue with McMicken Avenue below. It followed what today is the Fairview Steps, and it was the shortest incline and the only incline without an entertainment venue at the top. It closed in 1923. As automobile usage increased through the early 1900s, ridership on the streetcar began to wane. The city of Cincinnati, as well as nearby Norwood, had a very anti-rail stance, and so after World War II was over, the streetcars were very quickly phased out in favor of trolleys and buses. The last streetcar operated in 1951. You can see a real-life old streetcar by going to the Cincinnati Museum Center, and if you live in Cincinnati and you haven't been there, what are you doing? Interestingly, San Francisco's cable car system was also threatened with a similar closure in 1947, but a public vote ended up saving them. Today, San Francisco's cable cars are a vital piece of tourism. In honor of Cincinnati, one of the F Market and Wharves Line streetcars is painted yellow with green stripes. One piece of streetcar history that you can visit still today is the Newport South Bank Bridge, which is more popularly known as the Purple People Bridge. This bridge began as a freight train bridge, but was converted to pedestrian, automobile, and streetcar traffic in 1897. They ended streetcar service on the bridge in the 40s, but continued to use it as a bridge for cars and trains until the early 2000s when they converted it into a pedestrian bridge. It's honestly a really cool piece of history, and it makes it so easy to get into Newport from downtown Cincinnati. Sadly, the Cincinnati area went streetcarless for many decades. In 2001, they started talking about opening a streetcar in Cincinnati after Portland, Oregon had opened one and saw a lot of success in encouraging development and growth. The plan to build a streetcar was finally approved in 2008, but it took until 2016 for it to actually open. Its official name is the Cincinnati Bell Connector, and the connector operates on a 2.5-mile loop through the neighborhoods of downtown and over the Rhine. It's definitely a far cry from what the streetcar system used to be, but honestly, I will take what I can get. There are 18 stops along the route, and you can expect one of these cars to arrive every 10 to 15 minutes. You can also track the current cars with the Transit app. They made the ride totally free during the pandemic and then decided to make that change permanent, and the results are so clear if you look at the ridership numbers. 2019 saw about 530,000 people riding the connector, and from January to June of this year, the connector has already seen 509,000. Last year, it saw over 846,000. It is definitely a great way to get around downtown. They have talked about extending the streetcar, but nothing has ever officially stuck, but maybe one day. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you learned something new, and I will talk to you guys next time. Bye!